Hello, Dr. Fox here with Chapter 11, Health and Well-Being. All right, here we go. So, we need to think about a few things as we're talking about health and well-being across cultures, because we may not all have the same idea of what health is. And then when we're talking in science, you have to figure out how to measure things. What are you measuring? Why are you measuring it? So, we have physical aspects of health that would seem to be fairly obvious. But maybe not so much when we get down to what exactly is healthy. And then well being in general becomes a really complex question because we could be talking about physical, could be talking mental, emotional, could be talking about your material possessions or goods. What do you need to be happy? Or maybe about your satisfaction with your life. Um, in terms of health, well, the opposite would seem to be disease. But there are different concepts about disease as you go to other ways of thinking. Um, is there something objective that we can say is disease? Well, maybe you don't feel good. Maybe your functionality is impaired. Um, there are actually a lot of cultures where the idea of disease as a gift is an important factor. So, um, Nanhuatzin, I think you would say that, was one of the Mayan gods. And when they needed a sacrifice, he was covered with sores and boils and stuff like that, pretty gross. And he's the one who jumped into the cosmic fire to complete their ritual of creation. Um, and he's the kind of god of healers, it would seem, in the ancient Mayan religion. So um, this is not uncommon. Black elk was a um, Lakota medicine man who got his healing gift when he fell into what would probably be described as a coma for a few days as a boy. And he woke up with deep spiritual knowledge. This is a fairly normal thing. Later on, there'll be a picture of a Briot shaman, um, and they, generally speaking, were um, they would go through an illness or some kind of trauma that would give them their gift of healing. Okay, so and then why we have diseases? That's another whole big question. I've been working on that one um, in a different book that I've written. Um, and a lot of times, the situation, what have you done to bring this illness upon yourself? Might be a question that people would ask you. Okay, around the world, well, generally, lifespan is highly correlated, um, positively correlated to income. So developed nations have much longer lifespans in general. The US probably is somewhere um, around here. It is not on the upper end, um, wouldn't you think? But developed nations, yeah, it's gone a lot of increase since in the past 150, 200 years. Developing what are referred to as developing nations, um, they have since 1960 to 2000 increased lifespan by 20 years. This is no small feat. Um, okay, so what are we supposed to call health? By the way, you can look up Gapminder and you can find Hans Rosling doing very interesting talk about this stuff. All right, so historically, increase in per capita income has coincided with increase in lifespan. This is part of the techno-physio evolution. Um, Mothers and children, women face incredible risks, as about half of you in the class, maybe more actually. Usually it's more than half, female in assigned to birth female in um, higher education in general these days. But they face a lot of risks. Pregnancy can be fatal. Childbirth can be fatal. Um, Maternal health is the biggest determiner of the health of families, and maternal education is a big part of that. More education, fewer children, um, you know, more maternal income, better health for the whole family, less infant mortality. This quote from 1661: one third of all that were ever quick die under 5 years old. Quick is what you become quick when you're born and you breathe. You join the quick as opposed to the dead. Um, okay, uh, poverty, malnutrition, neglect. The effects of this can start in utero before you're born, but certainly in infancy and childhood, there are ongoing effects of this. Perhaps your brain does not develop as well because you lacked adequate nutrition to develop the neural network. Um, and these effects of early deprivation are strongest. The poorer your country is, the more these effects are. Um, uh, Very sills, I don't know. Better education, improved health. This is pretty obvious in some ways, but it took, you know, this author, this researcher, to absolutely demonstrate it statistically. So there are some reasons you may, if you're more educated, more informed lifestyle choices, probably including better prenatal care for your children, um, better foods, um, better knowledge of health in general and what treatments are available medically, higher social status. It doesn't just mean that um, people look up to you more. It also means that you have more access. But if you look at Maslow, which we will in just a moment, higher social status means you're uh, going further in his conceptualization of how you become a successful, um, you know, a person who has moved up the hierarchy of needs. Okay. On the other hand, stress is a huge problem, impacts people physically and psychologically. Generally speaking, we face stressors all the time now that were never around. Used to be um, basically the stressor was, are you going to live or die? And we're still wired for that. We have basically a really simple nervous system that responds to threat. Um, if you have bill collectors calling you, you will go into a physiological state very similar to what you would have gone into if you were being attacked by a mastodon. Um, some interesting researchers, Hans Selye did really kind of terrible things to animals, but he found that uh, we have a certain pattern of response to stress. So at first, there's a little pause, you kind of freak out for a moment, and then you resist, you resist, you resist until you reach exhaustion, and then it falls off the other end, and you're in deep kimchi at that point. Holmes and Rahe, really interesting. They were involved in veterans hospitals in the 1960s, and they watched these older gentlemen because it was almost all guys in the VA hospitals at that time, and they were at that time veterans of probably all the way back to the Spanish American War in the 1890s, but more likely World War One, World War Two, Korea, Vietnam. But the Vietnam guys were just coming in then. The older ones, World War II, World War One, they would be doing fine. You know, you'd get to know these old guys who would come in for maybe chronic stuff or regular checkups. And then all of a sudden, they would go downhill, get sick, and die. And Holmes and Rahe found that this often was following, you know, being good scientists. They were like, what's going on here? And they found that it was often following some kind of a big stressor, like the biggest one being loss of a spouse. You can look up the social readjustment scale online. You can find it. You can find ones that score it automatically. There is a student social readjustment scale that has slightly less. I mean, a lot of college students now, I realize there's a wide range. I went back to school in my 30s. Um, so there's a big range of people who might take it, but you can check out the regular scale or the student scale or both. It's good to know how much stress you're under. And if you exceed a certain point, you are likely to get sick. Okay. And in terms of mental health, the chronic strains can be more damaging than even acute stressors. People talk about cumulative stresses, stressors, um, what we call allostatic stress load. So homeostasis is your body's in balance. Allostasis is kind of the opposite, what's working against you. And minorities, immigrants, refugees, war survivors, these are all categories of people who face more cumulative stressors. You know, your whole town has been bombed to smithereens. That's a big stressor because you've also lost your food, your utilities, your sanitation. Many things are gone, and these are going to cause ongoing stressors, leading to the cumulative advantage disadvantage theory. If you have advantage, you're probably going to keep it. Disadvantage is probably going to keep causing problems for you. Um, Ethnic minorities experience a lot of disadvantages in health. Generally speaking, with lower income, there's poorer nutrition, educational opportunities. I'm sorry, but they are statistically um, uh, less likely for minorities, and that's not just in the U.S. This is in other countries too. In Indonesia, I'm sorry, in Malaysia, um, there are certain laws there that favor the what are called Bumi Putra, the indigenous, well, the Malaysian majority ethnicity. So if you're Chinese in Malaysia, and I met people, I've talked with people like this, you're likely to go to another country for at least high school and college. Also, there's more incarceration. Okay, so, and interestingly, though, risk behaviors, white American youths are the ones who are most likely to engage in risky stuff, including cigarette smoking, at over 4% higher than Hispanics and 10% higher than African Americans. So, who's really the ones who are getting into trouble? Okay. The WHO has been trying to define health and well being for a long time. This is as part of the UN, which is having some troubles these days, but by and large, World Health Organization has been since World War II a major supporter of health and well being around the world. So they defined in 1946 health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So it's not just that you're not sick, not just that you're not hurt, it's that you actually have positive things going on. But well being is a difficult thing to define. So Hayworth and Hart, 2007, they found definitions that included happiness, satisfaction, contentment, fulfillment, and hedonic are things you enjoy. Eudaimonic, anyway, it's all about um, uh, positive kind of stuff that they're finding. A variety of ways that people describe that. Kamen and Flett kind of distinguished subjective well-being. So subjective being your own feelings about it as opposed to objective, observable. And they emphasized complete lasting satisfaction with life as a whole, more good or pleasurable feelings than bad, and a scarcity of unpleasant feelings. Okay, the WHO eventually came up with, this is from Nagpal and Sel, um, this list. And Nagpal and Sel kind of went around the world and asked a whole lot of people what they thought was appropriate for measuring well-being. So subjective well-being in two phases: positive affect, good feelings, and negative affect, bad feelings. So you'd want high positive and low negative. Mental mastery over self. You're in control. You feel you're in control of your life. Rootedness, belongingness. Belongingness is a big one. Structural and cohesive aspects of family life. This means you have a family that's holding together. Density of social network. Well, this is not Facebook. This is like the people you know and are connected with. Security and crisis. If bad stuff happens, are you okay? Especially if there's, like, wars and stuff. And then expectation, achievement, harmony. Um, is what you expect in your life coming about? Uh, Gallup has done some amazing work, really interesting stuff. The founder of Gallup, Mr. Gallup, I can't remember his first name off the top of my head, was really interested in what would help people to do better, to feel better. And so he came up with sense of purpose. So you feel like you have something, going on in your life that's important to you. Social, you have relationships. This is like the density of social network we just saw. Financial, you have enough economic resources to do what you need and be safe. Community, where you live, you feel safe and you have pride in your community. This is something. Now, keep in mind, Gallup is a massive statistical organization, so they probably come through a whole lot of statistical data to come up with this. And then physical, that your health is good, you have enough energy. This is Maslow. Maslow's an interesting character. I did kind of a deep dive for my mortality book. Um, and it seems he might have gotten some of these ideas from hanging out with some Native Americans for a couple of weeks who didn't necessarily feel like he got it right. But this is one way that you can look at how to achieve um, the best that a person can be. And this is coming from a movement called positive psychology. So Maslow's hierarchy, um, if your physical needs are met, then you can move on to, hopefully you can be safe. You have social connection. This is that social thing again. And then how's your sense of self-esteem? If you're, according to Maslow, if your physical needs are not met, esteem is not really very important. You have to build these one upon the other. And then self-realization, can you actually achieve everything you can achieve as a human? And then toward the end of his life, he came up with self-transcendence. So that's kind of moving beyond I'm an individual to I am part of the greater reality, part of the universe. Um, okay, so um, people argue for and against Maslow's hierarchy. Maslow did not make the triangle, did not make the pyramid for it. That was from a um, business training kind of guy. Um, a few years later, but Maslow did enjoy that this became popular in business circles because, well, frankly, he needed income toward the end of his life. All right, a different conceptualization of the healthy self. This is the Maori um, conceptualization. Mason Dury and some other Maori health, um, uh, physical and mental health people got together in the early 1980s and had a meeting where they discussed, well, what really is healthy in Maori terms. And they came up with um, these four categories, the four walls of this healthy self. You have to have a spiritual connection to the unseen world, faith. Mentally, You need to be able to communicate, think, and feel. So this is kind of like your mind and body connection. The physical world is your physical development, your healthy body, and your connection to, the physical world around you. And then social, once again, belongingness, sharing, caring. Okay, so you put these all together and you have a healthy person. Note 1817, Maori Nicholas is observing that they're absolutely amazingly healthy people. Now, within 80 years, there had been a massive mortality from imported diseases, skirmishes with the incoming British military. So, about, let's see, by the 1880s, I think about 60% roughly of Maori were dead. So the massive drop in population, and their health was not good. It's still not that great. Overrepresentation in prison and in mental health institutions. Um, I mean, it's kind of obvious why, as with Native Americans, you take away people's culture, put them into situations that are really kind of demeaning and reduce their access to nutrition and healthcare. No, people are not going to do well. So, anyway, but Dury, Sir Mason Dury at this point um, did a lot in terms of promoting Maori health. All right. Um, then we get to more the typical psychology question of mental illness, mental health. And I put in the APA definition there. Nosology in general is uh, it's the study of disease classification. The big figures are Wilhelm Wundt, and you should remember from Intro Psych, Wilhelm Wundt established the first psychology laboratory um, in 1879, and Emil Kraepelin was one of his students. Now, Kraepelin was not necessarily a great guy. He was quite racist, but he did come up with some things that still, between those two guys, there's a huge influence on what is now in the DSM-5 TR. Um, okay, so he also proposed a comparative psychology, or what we would now call probably cross-cultural psychology. Dementia praecox was Kraepelin's name for schizophrenia. So he was the first one to really define that. In that definition, he included the term autism, which was kind of like the schizophrenic person was kind of locked into themselves, which you do see with catatonic schizophrenia, especially. So these are definitions and concepts that still appear in the DSM-5. Neo-Kraepelinians, there's a word you can use at parties. Those Neo-Kraepelinians um, tend now to be more biomedical. In terms of pathogenesis is how a disease comes out, and in terms of treatment, so more oriented toward neurochemistry. Um, yeah, let's see. Okay. Um, in terms of modern definitions, well, a big thing you need to keep in mind is that how you define and diagnose mental illness affects who pays for it. So, insurance companies will generally probably want something from the ICD, International Classification of Diseases. I think it's the ICD-11 that's most common right now. For psychologists, it's actually the American Psychiatric Association that generates the DSM series, which is now on its fifth big revision. This is starting from around 1950 with the DSM that didn't have a number, and then DSM 4 in the 90s, DSM 4 TR, I think, was around 2004. DSM-5 was 2011. So it keeps evolving. But there's codes for an amazing array. It's about 1,000 pages long. Okay, but we don't know really what mental health is like around the world because, well, for one thing, 30% of countries have no health system at all. And of those that do they use the ICD? Do they use the DSM? And a lot do not. I mean, China has had a system of medicine for, like 3,000 years. India's is about as old too. So they're not necessarily really jumping at a complete switch over to the, you know, Euro or Euro American standards, um, you know, because they got another thing going on. So, um, whatever you may think of the biomedical system, the biomedical industry, one could say, there are other systems in other countries. And some people, some countries, some whole countries have very little access. So if you're talking about, Somalia, you're going to find that probably 90% plus are going to go to traditional healers if they can afford to go to anybody at all. Canada, about 60% of people there will go to some alternative kind of healthcare. Okay. And it is notable that we've studied now cognitive ways of thinking, and there's a particular type of cognition that is typical for the biomedical field. Um, to understand that, you have to have a certain view of neurochemicals and neurological structures that may be more or less important in different mental health issues. Um, Now, another big thing, this actually kind of started coming out when people started trying to do personality tests in other cultures. And I'll be darned, a lot of people had what uh, might be called a dependent personality disorder, which is actually valued. Japanese culture was one of the first ones that was like, hey, wait a minute, this is not right. So you can be diagnosed in still in the DSM-5. There's some issues about this as to whether it's really a disorder or it's just a cultural bias. Somatization is another thing that is really important in terms of healthcare in general. In a lot of languages, there may not be a word for depression or anxiety or something like that. And so people may tend to talk about physical symptoms like I feel dizzy, or, well, I mean, if you are feeling anxiety, you may have feelings in your stomach and you may talk about it that way. Um, so, will people talk about a psychological kind of thing, or will they talk about things physically? Um, and a lot of this stuff goes way back. Hysteria, by the way, which Egyptians said was displacement of the uterus. Hysteria was still a diagnosis. Freud, that was one of his main sources of patients, was women suffering from hysteria. So these ideas have hung on for a long time. Galen in ancient Rome, imbalance of humors would cause madness. Well, that actually really goes back to ancient India. Thousands of years ago, people have been talking about humors, that being like blood, bile, those kind of things. Um, um, and then in the DSM-4, there's a whole category of what was called culture-bound disorders. And these include amok, which was a person kind of like goes into a violent rage, which comes from the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia. Um, Some argue that that should have stayed. It's removed now. There is what's called the cultural uh, cultural assessment interview in the DSM-5. But some people argue that some of these things really are not, uh, should not have been taken out. And some people would say that something like anorexia, eating disorders, are really a culture bound disorder of European, Euro American kind of culture. Road rage, do people really feel that other places? Um, yeah, these are questions. Okay, and then in terms of care, well, there are three basic things that have to happen for healthcare. There have to be people who do it, there has to be a knowledge base, and there are particular things they do, behaviors. Um, we're very familiar in the US with Western biomedical model, um, but there are traditions that are specific to every culture all over the world. We can't really estimate how many practitioners there are in the world, but most of them are not using the biomedical system. So there's a lot. Um, and then one interesting thing is while people may seem to look down their noses at anything outside of the biomedical model, a lot of things, aspirin is from a plant. You know, it was used for hundreds of thousands of years. Who does these treatments? Well, you know, could be a kahuna, shamanic healers. There's a Boreat shaman there. Um, and we do know that complementary and alternative medicine is pretty widespread. We know that it can improve at least your subjective well being. And some people have found that Chinese herbal medicine is more effective at treatment of depression than Western medicine. It's kind of a crapshoot, honestly, with depression as to whether your selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor is really going to reduce your depression or not. Um, arts and well-being. This word communitas, kind of coined by Victor Turnbull, who was sort of a Renaissance guy, sort of sociologist, arts critic. Um, but the idea that we come together in certain ways, and we need that, and so like in religion and in arts performance, there really wasn't a separation between those historically in pretty much any culture. That's a thing of the last couple hundred years. It used to be that um, dances, I mean, there were social dances, I'm sure, in pretty much any culture, but there were also rituals, and those rituals brought people together. Um, so, no separation between art and communitas and religion. Um, we know now that people, your social network, your social connectedness is going to be the biggest indicator of your health and well-being, statistically. So, I mean, there's individual variation. But with learning arts, you can increase your knowledge of your heritage culture. You can increase your sense of identity, you know, and you're going to have probably more robust pride in who you are, where you're from. Okay. And that is that.